Cheshire is a small, quiet town in northern Berkshire County which has retained much of its rural character since it was founded in 1793. But in 1802, Cheshire and its townspeople became known across America for producing a dairy product of mammoth proportions. While Thomas Jefferson was the big cheese in what was known as the President's House, it was the cheese that Cheshire made for the president that captured the headlines that New Year's Day. Steve Kiltonick went to Adams to discover the truth behind Cheshire's legendary big cheese.
At St. Stanislaus Kostka School in Adams, another year has begun for kindergarten teacher Kristen Demio. Kristen's class is held in the Little Red Schoolhouse, which is adjacent to the main school building. Besides teaching, Demio is also known in these parts as a writer. Kristen, who grew up in Cheshire, is the author of 4 short books, 3 of which are on local history, including The Legend of Mount Greylock, Susan, which is about the suffragist and women's rights advocate Susan B. Anthony. She was born in Adams, just up the hill from the school, and her latest, which is called Jefferson's Cheshire Cheese. She credits her grandparents for instilling in her a love for the past.
I've always had a fascination for the yesteryears, and I always want that not to be forgotten.
Jefferson's Cheshire cheese is about a little-known footnote in history. Back in 1801, Cheshire was a small farming community, like many western Massachusetts towns, but it had earned a reputation for its cheese-making. In the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson, a Republican, opposed the incumbent John Adams, a Federalist and Massachusetts native. Jefferson was a staunch supporter of religious liberty. Cheshire pastor John Leland was a Baptist, who were advocates in the early republic of the separation of church and state. Adams represented the conservatives and the interests of big businessmen from Boston.
Jefferson wanted to be for the people. He wanted to be for the farmers. He wanted people involvement in government.
The Commonwealth cast all of its electoral votes for Adams, but Jefferson won the popular vote. Cheshire was the only Berkshire town to cast all of its votes for Jefferson. Pastor Leland was overjoyed with Jefferson's victory.
He says we need to make a gesture to Jefferson to show our support, to show our allegiance, that we're the only one in this county that voted for him. So they got together on a July evening. They said, what are we going to create? And they thought the cheese.
But this wasn't your ordinary cheese. This was to be a monstrous cheese. It would weigh 1,235 pounds and be 4 feet wide and 18 inches thick.
Pre-industrial cheesemaking was a woman's task. It was a woman's expertise.
Near the center of town is a monument dedicated to Pastor Leland and the Cheshire cheese. It's a replica of the cider press that was used to produce the 1,200-pound cheese, which was made from the milk of nearly every cow in town. At that time, there would have been about 900 Republican cows. If you were a Federalist and owned a cow, you couldn't participate.
All the milk from those cows was brought together near Whiteford Rocks, which is up again near Stafford Hill, and they all brought the oxen in, however they could bring it in, and they poured this into a cider press because they didn't have a cheese press big enough. So Darius Brown, who was one of the blacksmiths, made this big hoop, and you have that screw that comes down, and it put a lot of pressure on that and had it all flow out, and then they let it age.
On the cheese rind was scripted the Jeffersonian motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God."
It was an event that everybody came out. The town came out, they came by horse, they came by foot. They were their Sunday best.
So how does one transport a gigantic cheese to the nation's capital without it spoiling?
They did it in the winter, natural refrigeration. It was cold.
Pastor Leland and Darius Brown accompanied the cheese on its 500-mile, month-long journey. The cheese was first put on a sled, which was pulled in the snow by 2 oxen from Cheshire to Troy, New York. It was then transported by boat down the Hudson and eastern seaboard to Maryland. On January 1st, 1802, the Cheshire cheese was drawn on a dray by 2 steeds down Pennsylvania Avenue to its final destination.
They walked into the president's house, they presented it to him, and it was a big event. And I believe at that time there was a letter written from the town, and Jefferson wrote back. And it was very personable. He embraced it. From what they said, they were congressmen, diplomats, they all had cheese. They said even a year later the cheese was still there. Some was thrown in the Hudson.
In the book, Kristen has also included various math quizzes to engage the minds of older readers and to help them figure out the dimensions and distances mentioned. Kristen says that during her research, she discovered a geographical fact that left her head scratching. While most Berkshire town borders are fairly nondescript, Cheshire's town lines bear a strong resemblance to the iconic Minuteman, the patriotic symbol of Massachusetts, long before it even existed. A mere coincidence?
Is that a message to us of the patriotism? A small town making a gesture back in the 1800s, 2 centuries ago, saying it's important. It's important to be active in your government. It's important to let the voice of people be heard. It's a symbol of what we were and why we went to become independent in 1776, and not to forget that.
For Real to Real, I'm Steve Kiltonick.
And Steve tells us that Kristen dedicated her book to a town resident, 102-year-old Eileen Nuttall, who is a direct descendant of Darius Brown, one of the first settlers of Cheshire and creator of the monstrous cheese hoop in 1801. On her 100th birthday, she was granted an award from the state in recognition for her longtime efforts to preserve the history of Cheshire for future generations. Now that is a very interesting story.